Yeah, Professor Alaka Sharma, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. Okay, I couldn't hear. Yeah, now it's all fine. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I think we will begin. We are already a few minutes delayed because of connectivity issues again that we had today. Uh, Welcome. And viewers, today we have Professor Alaka Sharma with us. She is from the USTM Meghalaya, University of Science and Technology Meghalaya, and holding various posts, in the sense I think a versatile person with so many different attributes and qualities and achievements. It's very difficult actually to introduce somebody like Professor Sharma, though I will try it in very few brief words, and I hope, Professor Sharma, if I am not apologies in advance if I'm short of words, but maybe you can also bring out your own achievements that you have sort of are there. But I will name a few. Pro vice chancellor, plus above all, I think she's an educationist to begin with, for which I think she is most important to us. Besides her professional positions, she's also a direct honorary of the International Center for Gandhian Studies in the university. And other she her background is otherwise in economics, where also she has her own achievements in academic achievements, publications, etc. But the other side of it is the Akshar School, which I think is something which Professor Sharma has been sort of pursuing in a way which I think very so few of us can actually think about while also having a full flowing professional life. And if for those of you who are not what like the Akshar School, it's for the underprivileged children, and it's in by the highway. When you go, there's a place called Pamohi, which is actually a very picturesque location. There is a bypass to the airport by that way, by that place now. Uh, 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 the highway that goes from Jalukbari to Beltala. They have this Akshar school, and for underprivileged children. And recently, and they have various you know um, uh, what is called opportunities there for the children besides free education. And one of it is again this installation of it's a public charitable trust, and for poverty eradication through operation of schools that supplement vocational, formal educational vocational training. I think she will be able to tell you more about it, and that is how I feel this whole. Yesterday we ended our discussion with the note about how with Gandhian philosophy, the idea of nature, preserving nature, ecology, it becomes such an important issue, and all our speakers were sort of talking about that. So Professor Sharma today also, you can see, actually is also the same ideal, the same philosophy that we are talking about, is living it. So let us welcome her. And please, madam, I will request you to present your talk. Yeah, thank you.
Uh, Good afternoon, everybody. Hello.
Yeah,
And
we can hear
thank you
you.
very much. Thank you very much for a very generous and warm introduction. Uh, I don't know how much of it I actually deserve, but anyway, let us begin with the topic of deliberation. And today I would like to talk about Sarvodaya, the internal and the external dynamics of it. Now, Sarvodaya as a concept was coined by, the word itself was coined by Mahatma Gandhi. And I think most of us know that Mahatma Gandhi, when he was in South Africa, by his good friend Henry Pollack, he was given a book by Ruskin, John Ruskin, and the title of the book was Unto the Last. So here, Ruskin talks about the last man, Antim Admi. In Hindi, we call it Antim Admi, or sometimes Gandhiji used to refer to him as
Yeah, yeah,
Am
Professor
I
Sharma.
audible?
Yeah, yeah, you are.
Okay.
Uh,
Some disturbance was there.
yeah, some disturbance was there suddenly.
Okay. So Mahatma Gandhi talks about the Antimatri or the Dalitra Narayan. So Ruskin's book is about this unto the last. And when Mahatma Gandhi wanted to write about unto the last in Gujarati, in Hindi, then he had to give some title, and the title given was Sarvodaya. So this is how the word was coined, Sarvodaya. In Sanskrit, Sarvodaya means everybody's Uday, Sarva Uday. It means welfare of all. Basically, it means welfare of all. So Sarvodaya concept is a concept which encompasses.
Yes, Professor Sharma. Yeah,
Can I continue?
yeah. There
Can
is
I?
some noise. I don't know at which end, but there is lot of noise.
No, from my end there is no noise because I've closed all the rooms and everything. That should be okay.
So your end it is clear, right?
I don't think it is at my end.
Yeah, I think I don't know some disturbance in our end. I can hear a lot of vehicles moving or some type of somebody's.
It's
I
all
think
right. Somebody's
should be
mic is on.
mute. Yeah, somebody's mic. I do not have any noise around like that, but I'm not sure. Uh, yeah, now the sound is gone. I will request all the attendees to please kindly mute your mics. Otherwise, there is a background noise which is very disturbing. Yeah. Yeah, Professor Sharma, you can begin. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the disruption.
it's okay. It
I'm
happens.
sorry.
We have
Yeah,
got
yeah,
to the
yeah.
okay. So now what I was trying to tell was that Mahatma Gandhi coined the word Sarvodaya. It means upliftment of all. And this was the year 1908. So Mahatma Gandhi had is a philosophy of life. He had a view of life, he had a vision of life based on equality, based on dignity of labor, based on respect for nature, based on decentralized village communities with minimum government interference, and the life where justice for all is ensured. So all these concepts are imbibed in the concept of Sarvodaya. However, after 2000, after 1908, Mahatma Gandhi got involved with the freedom movement, and so the time was very limited. And then we find that after assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, Vinoba Bhave took up the concept of Sarvodaya forward, and we know that Vinoba undertook Padayatra lasting for 14 years, and his main concepts were Bhudan and Gramdan, and they had tremendous achievements in the sense that 42 lakh acres of land was given by way of Bhudan. But again, Bhudan, Gramdan are just parts of the basic concept of Sarvodaya. So Sarvodaya is a very large concept, and there are different dimensions of it. So that is why I have liked this topic very much, the internal and the external dynamics of Sarvodaya. So first of all, I would like to say why this topic is very important. Sarvodaya or welfare of all, this particular topic is very important because of variety of reasons. One most important reason is that today the technology allows us to provide enough enough of livelihood, enough of enough to sustain all the millions and billions of people who live on this earth. In short, because of the technological development, now we are in a position of surplus food production, which means there is food for all, there is enough for everybody to wear, there is enough surplus for everybody to have good education, good medical facilities, good habitat, and so on and so forth. Last century, we could not say that. Last century was marked by different famines. There was actually low food production. But now there is so much of food production, so much of surplus generated that if we can take care of the distribution, technically we can feed the entire population of the world decent, good food. We can provide for clothes, habitat, education, health, entertainment, everything. So technologically, humankind is poised in such a way that the entire mankind can have access to basic good aspects of life. That is number one. And number two is that now it has become very clear that a small minority, even a small minority can hold the entire mankind to ransom. We have seen how the uh, how America was held ransom on the 11/9, and we also know that a small minority, small group of people with biological warfare or with disease like corona, with disease like virus like corona, they can hold the entire humanity to ransom. In earlier times, one needed big armies, one needed warplanes and whatnot to hold the humanity to ransom or even to hold one country to ransom. But in today's life, in today's world, even a small minority, even 10,000 people, 1,000 people, if they decide to destroy the whole world, or for that matter, even one madman, if he or she decides to destroy the whole world, technologically, it is possible. So, on the one, we have enough for all. On the other hand, small minorities have also become very important. So it is not possible to ignore anybody. It is not advisable to ignore everybody. It is very necessary. It is a need of the hour that to survive as a humankind, to survive as a mankind, and to make progress, we must take each and every strata of society with us in the march towards progress, in the march towards happiness. That is why this topic is very important. And why this topic is important now? This topic is very important at this particular juncture because of pandemic, this corona, the COVID-19 pandemic, uh, there is a tectonic shift in thinking. On the one hand, the globalization, the concept of globalization has met with a very stiff challenge. The days of globalization are numbered, we can say. We also have a situation where day by day the state vigilance has tendency to increase. We also have a situation where unless we change, unless we take lessons from the situation, the mankind is marching towards its doom. And that is why at this particular juncture, the concept of Sarvodaya, welfare of all, is very important to all of us. Now, before we go into the internal and external dynamics of it, let us look at the life of Mahatma Gandhi. Actually, about Gandhiji, so many things need to be said. The first and the foremost thing is that he was a person who was continuously evolving. Like, I'm sure if Gandhiji was alive today, Gandhiji's may have had something very drastically different to say in the current situation because he was continuously evolving and his 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 firm belief was to truth. In fact, his autobiography is known as My Story of My Experiments with Truth. And he thought truth is God. He believed that the truth itself is God. And that is why he has gone on record saying that if there is a conflict between my views mentioned earlier and my views mentioned later, forget about my views which I have mentioned earlier. My later views be considered because between consistency and truth, I value truth more. So here is a person who says that truth is more important even than consistency, which means he was continuously evolving. And when the situations change, when the socio-economic political factors change, then maybe with more light, more facts, we to modify the opinion. So he was a person who was prepared to evolve and to say things and do things which the situation demanded that this truth be seen by him. So, why I am talking about this aspect more in detail is that to be truthful and to respect truth as God is a very important thing which defined Gandhiji's life, and it is this particular trait which took him to service of Daridra Narayan. So about Gandhi, we have to say one thing, that he was a firm believer of truth, and he wanted that truth should prevail under any situation. His personality was simple as well as enigmatic. Simple because he said, "My life is my message," and enigmatic because he threw very many surprises. And to understand him would mean that one practices what he preaches. So this is Mahatma Gandhi we are talking about, and this Mahatma Gandhi has given us this concept of Sarvodaya. So let us look at the internal and the external dynamics. Now, what do I mean by the internal dynamics? By internal dynamics, I mean that something that happens at the level of an individual, something that happens at the personal level. We can say, if you borrow terms from economics, we can say it's a micro concept. And by external dynamics, I mean the systemic view of life, or we can say that the macro aspect, or something about the whole society, the whole economy, the whole world. So Sarvodaya appeals to us at the micro level as well as at the macro level. There are certain micro aspects and certain macro aspects which we will go into details. So regarding the micro aspect, I would like to say that Mahatma Gandhi, the first and the basic thing which he believed in was simple living and high thinking. Now, in today's world, simple living and high thinking is something which is not generally said or done or talked about, because technology gives us so much of option. At the same time, there is the true happiness. If you look at this simple life in in conformation with nature, towards reverence towards nature, and maintaining some equilibrium between nature and mankind. This simple life is something which will make our life sustainable on this planet. Because we have seen that one can't play with nature beyond a certain point. Nature takes its own revenge. Now we have seen that there are examples of acid rains falling in some places, the glaciers are melting, many animal species have become extinct. There are reports that if bees become extinct, then the entire food production will be affected, because the important role of pollination is being done by the bees. And we have seen that with glaciers melting, with temperatures changing, with the monsoon patterns changing, many changes are taking place. And it is possible that in the entire chain of evolution, if certain important links become extinct, then the future of mankind may be at stake. So, variety at what cost? And variety for what? This question has come up. So Gandhiji's concept of simple living and high thinking is very important at the personal level, and this is one of the most important in terms of this thing. Mahatma Gandhi has listed 7 sins. And do you know what is the first among the 7 sins? Wealth without work. He has used sin. Sin is an important, sin is a very big word. Wealth without work, he has considered as one of the sins. So this means the dignity of labor. This means that we don't disrespect any work, and we learn to do so many things by hand. Just because we are highly educated, it doesn't mean that we do only the mental work. We do gardening, our own household work, looking after ourselves. These things are very important. And last but not the least, Mahatma Gandhi has given us a very important tool, and this tool is the tool of satyagraha. Very important concept. This concept is the concept of satyagraha. But satyagrahi means that one person can challenge a mighty empire one person can challenge the government by satyagraha. And there are many conditions associated with satyagraha. But when I look at the watch, I think I must cut down on this explanation. In the course of discussion later on, maybe we can have a discussion. So, in the internal aspect, I've taken three things. Uh, Wealth without work is a sin, simple living and high thinking, and satyagraha. And at the macro level, or at the external dynamics of the concept of Sarvodaya, we can say that as far as external aspects are concerned, one thing is that if power is getting concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, economic power, political power, and even the cultural domination is getting concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. We have the entire theory of Keynes, we have the entire theory of Karl Marx, which says that when power gets concentrated, what happens? Now, when power gets concentrated, that means a small minority holds huge power, and the vast majority is powerless. This is essentially a recipe for a disaster, and we are heading towards that. If you do not want to head towards a disaster, it is high time we look at the concept of satyagraha. This is number one. Number two is that there is a limit beyond which we cannot play with nature. We cannot take nature for granted. And this means that we have to live in synchronization with nature. And when we live in synchronization with nature, we come to the concept of simple living and high thinking. Mahatma Gandhi said, there is enough in the world for needs of everybody, but there is not enough for the greed of everybody. So, in other words, the limits to growth are set by the, the capacity of humankind to negotiate with nature or to take nature into confidence, to live with nature, to live in synchronization with nature, to live with respectful behavior with nature. So these again boils down to the concept of Sarvodaya, where we talk about to everybody according to their needs, but not according to the greeds. And the last one is that the concept of biological warfare has become almost a reality now. So biological warfare, how dangerous it is, I will not tell. But this biological warfare is such an uh, important area of life which cannot be ignored. Mankind will die for want of clean water, proper food if the biological warfare is unleashed. So, to check the biological warfare, again, we must talk about inclusiveness. We must treat the whole village, the whole earth as one village, the whole globe as one village. And this inclusiveness is what we talk about Sarvodaya. So there are three aspects we have touched regarding the internal aspects and three aspects we have touched regarding the external aspects. By way of conclusion, I would like to say that individuals' growth, one person's growth is inherent in the welfare and the growth of the whole mankind. One person cannot grow at the cost of others. One person cannot grow when others are languishing. So the whole mankind has to either march forward together or the whole mankind will perish. So this inclusiveness is very important now at this point of time. Secondly, lasting peace is possible only when all sections of society are included in the dynamic process of economic development, social development, and economic empowerment of all. Now, when we discuss everything, there is so much more to discuss, but uh, there is not much time to give examples, so there is not much time to give quotations by Mahatma Gandhi or Vinoba Bhave. I would like to say a few things, few words about one movement initiated by Mahatma Gandhi, which epitomizes the concept of Sarvodaya, which epitomizes the concept of his vision of life, his vision of a good society. And this movement is none other than the Dandi March or the Salt movement. When Mahatma Gandhi came from South Africa after his stint of 20 years in South Africa, at that time,
ह्युमॅनिटीचे प्रोग्राम असा नेकी किंवा ह्युमॅनिटीचे प्रोग्राम असा नेकी किंवा गांधीयन आयडियल ते
came back from South Africa after the stint of 20 years there to India, his guru Gopal Krishna Gokhale suggested that he tour the whole India. And when Mahatma Gandhi toured the whole of India, he realized that people were not fearless, people were afraid. The British rulers had managed to suppress the life from the people. People were afraid to take any decision, to talk openly, to go ahead. People were afraid, they were not aware of their rights, and they were basically not connected. So Mahatma Gandhi, through various means, he tried to inculcate fearlessness in people. He tried to involve all sections of society in the freedom movement. A lot of examples can be given how it was done. In different parts of India, different people, regional leaders were born. Later on, they all became the national leaders. Different issues were highlighted, and Mahatma Gandhi himself got involved. We can say about his dress. He picked up this particular dress because he thought, okay, the millions of people, his fellow human beings, have not enough to wear. So he thought he must wear something which the millions of poor people can identify with. So simple loincloth. In short, Mahatma Gandhi was going through all this phase when in 1930 there was time for salt satyagraha. Now, salt satyagraha, what is salt satyagraha? If you look at statistics, it means one 63-year-old man, he decided to march some 240 kilometers with 80 of his fellow human beings and reached a particular point called Dandi, and all that they did was to pick up a pinch of salt. So, if one wants to talk about Mahatma Gandhi's salt satyagraha in terms of bare minimum materialistic interpretation, this was all. However, when Mahatma Gandhi started on salt satyagraha, he started with 80 people, and by the time he reached Dandi, the group of satyagrahi had swelled to 50,000 people. And what was the whole philosophy? The philosophy was Mahatma Gandhi said that British have no right to impose tax on us because British have no right to rule over us. Now, the British Empire, the mighty British Empire, it is said that the sun never sets in the mighty British Empire. So, such a mighty British Empire was challenged by picking up a pinch of salt. And the philosophy was since they have no right to rule over India, they have no right to impose tax. But look at how Mahatma Gandhi has done. Since he has a vision of society, since he has inclusive philosophy, since he talks about equality of all, dignity of labor, uh, he shuns violence, and that is why we find that by the time the group reaches Dandi, it swells to 50,000 people. Mahatma Gandhi picks up a pinch of salt, and the whole nation is set on fire. And mind you, this was the time when there was no WhatsApp, there was phone connectivity was not there, international connectivity was very bad, but the power of Satyagraha was such that the mighty British Empire was shaken. Batches after batches, Satyagrahis came, they picked up the pinch of salt, the soldiers butchered them, the soldiers beat them, but yet nobody raised any UN cry, nobody responded to violence, they just silently suffered. And the act of picking up a pinch of salt, it became a major landmark in the freedom struggle. Now, this is the example. This epitomizes this Satyagraha or salt movement or Dandi Kuch, Dandi March epitomizes Mahatma Gandhi's vision of life, Mahatma Gandhi's vision of how one can shape one's own future. And I feel that this epitomizes the entire personality of Gandhi and it imbibes the basic ingredients of what Sarvodaya is all about. So, this philosophy of Sarvodaya with this internal and external dynamism, finally we come to a conclusion that human transformation, personal transformation is necessary for systemic change, and systemic change is very essential so that the human dignity is maintained and we live in a dignified society where everybody has access to dignified way of life. So I think that Sarvodaya, this is Sarvodaya, and this is Mahatma Gandhi. Uh, with these few words, I would like to keep the discussion open to the group. If there are any questions or if there are any things which we can discuss, I'll be very happy. And thank you very much, Sukanya, for arranging everything. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll now open it for a few questions before we move on to our next speaker. So please, if there are questions from the attendees, uh, please, you can raise your hand. You can ask your questions. It was a very motivating uh, talk, very fluid, very lucid. Yeah, I can see Prabhu Venkataraman from Department of HSS. Professor Prabhu. Yeah, Prabhu, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful lecture, ma'am. That's really inspiring and very interesting as well. But I have one observation to the extent of getting your inputs in this regard. Like even many a times these days, we can able to see a protest that happens quite peacefully and in a non-violent manner. But over a period of few days or few times, this protest tends to turn violent. Like similar such cases would have been there at the time of Gandhi as well. Like how you would have responded to such type of the change of dimension in the way how protests are being dealt, even though it starts with non-violence. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Prabhu, it's a very pertinent observation that you have made. And Mahatma Gandhi was known to have several fasts and to when he came across such issues and such problems. So he was to say that the fast is for self purification. He couldn't tell that well the society needs to purify, but when he would go on fast and then after 10 days, 11 days, people will come up and say, okay, well, we are sorry. And this particular thing was very prominently observed at the time of partition because Mahatma Gandhi went on a fast in Kolkata because there was violence in Kolkata in the entire Bengal over partition. And finally, the leaders of both the communities came and pleaded with Mahatma Gandhi, please withdraw your fast. We won't quarrel anymore. So this was one important way in which Mahatma Gandhi reacted. And the second thing, which is more important, is that he used to call off the movement like the Chauri Chora movement, Chauri Chora point in the movement. In the Quit India movement, at one point at Chauri Chora, one family of a British officer was murdered by the mob. The mob was supposed to be non-violent, but at some point they became violent. And it was the peak of the movement. And it was felt that if the movement continued, the British will have to quit. But Mahatma Gandhi said that violence is not allowed, so I call off the movement. And people were devastated because the movement had actually taken the momentum. And this happened at Chauri Chora, and this is known as Chauri Chora decision of Mahatma Gandhi. But Mahatma Gandhi stood firm. He withdrew the movement. He said no movement, no go back British, and he went into a fast. So it was possible for him because he had that stature and he had built that stature. So these are the two observations that I want to make about your
Thank you
question.
so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else uh, with questions? We are also live on YouTube. We have participants there. We are also live on Facebook. So Yes. So, in line with what Professor Prabhu was asking just now, um, I was. It often also strikes, and after yesterday's deliberations, what we had, the fact about that violence, like satyagraha, which you said was like a one-man weapon, and devised in a way that would actually shake up a whole monolithic structure. Do you think in the present world it has been, or rather in India, it has been wrongly utilized or misunderstood, or there is a need to revise, clear the understanding?
Yes, Sukanya, absolutely. You have just pinpointed the right thing. Like, people in some parts of India, we have this system of fasting for 2 hours, token fast of 2 hours. Now, this is making mockery of Gandhian concept. The satyagraha, what Gandhiji meant was that when all other avenues of seeking justice fail, then only you resort to satyagraha. This is number one. Number two is that one doesn't hate one's opponent. In fact, one's opponent is affectionately regarded. And that is why this similar phrase was coined that hate the crime and not the criminal. So one doesn't hate the person perpetuating violence or atrocities, but one just acts the act of violence of the other person. So one must hold the other person with love, one must purify oneself, and then only one goes ahead with satyagraha. And if with all this preparation, when one goes with satyagraha, then it leads to a civil disobedient movement. So you are very much right. In India, it is very often misused without trying the basic dialogue, without having the basic honesty, without having concern for other person's viewpoint. People just resort to something and they say this is satyagraha, but this is not satyagraha. This is duragraha. It is unfortunate that in India we have still to understand Mahatma Gandhi, and I'm sure that efforts like this made by IIT will help us understand Mahatma Gandhi in a better way.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, it is an effort made the countrywide by very high level organizations, the ministry, the UGC. And yesterday, our first speakers were referring to a revival of Gandhian philosophy and the how sort of a renaissance ideas, as forceful as that to build up a renaissance can happen if understood in clear perspective, and the relevance of his philosophy in our present way of life. And with the pandemic teaching us more lessons and making it, in fact, very pertinent that we really go back to what Gandhi was talking to us about, maintaining our own hygiene or our surroundings, about moral, about ethics, about moral behavior, which seems to be the answer to the pandemic that we are going through today. So, Professor Sharma, it was a really, we were really privileged. It was really wonderful listening to you, and how you actually a very, very lucid presentation. And I'm sure all our attendees, all our listeners, particularly benefited with your, very strong, definitions and, you know, uh, the examples that you used to define actually how Gandhi developed it with his own experience. During, before and after the movement. Thank you so much. And yeah, please be there with us. We are moving on to our next speaker, Professor
Yes.
Archana Barua.
Yes.
She is from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. She teaches philosophy here, and ma'am's interest has been on European philosophy, especially phenomenology, Husserl, and the development in Heidegger, existentialism, in hermeneutics, etc. And she's a regular contributor to research journals and have also talked about Gandhi's idea, Gandhian philosophy in different platforms. So now I would like to invite Professor Barua to begin her talk. But before that, I would also like to say that Baido is also a poet, and and she confirms it by putting it in her CV that as a literary person in her own right, she is Archana Borwa is a published Indian poet. I think that also tells us how actually this the basic sense of individual, you know, or individuality, that you recognize yourself, what you are, or what you want to be. Yes, Professor Professor Archana Barua, if yeah, please come in. I would now request you to make your presentation. Uh, I think something happened to her connection just now, and then she's trying to rejoin and come back uh, with the connectivity problems that galore. We had a very difficult time yesterday. Today, in fact, we could hear Professor Alaka Sharma clearly. That is, in fact, I think, in yesterday's comparison to what we suffered yesterday, it's sort of, benefit, sort of a real luck that we could hear her without much interruption.
Hello.
Yes, yes, you
Yeah,
are
yeah.
audible.
I'll begin now. Some problem was there, and thank you at the outset
I
for.
have already introduced you, by the way. I do not
Yeah,
know if you
I
heard.
will not. I will just begin, and because you see, I usually for my controlling part, I have made some slides. Otherwise, it's such a vast subject. I will not be able to do justice. Otherwise, so the basic, as I said, Sarvodaya, the Gandhian way to fair upliftment of all, and some philosophical observations, explorations. And here, today's post-pandemic, our current pandemic situation, it is Gandhi's time, we can say. He is more relevant with his clarion call to extricate ourselves from the mesmerization of modernity, something that can still be interpreted by many as uh, Gandhian way of taking us back to the bullock cart time. But no, Gandhi's scientific temperament, his scientific zeal, that I will talk later. But what he says today, we have seen that uh, we can, we have seen that with so much of technology and science advancement, also sometimes we become simply helpless, and then we have to recall our other human resources, how to move ahead with sanity. And we can still rely on the Mahatma, the experimenter in naturopathy, to use effective preventive treatment, household remedies, along with some other traditional guidelines, such as maintaining personal hygiene, promoting and ensuring community sanitation, and restricting ourselves to our localities, avoiding long distance travel. This is already what is in Gandhi's all his writings. And it also, COVID-19 situation also exposes the inherent fragility of our globally interconnected economic systems and the inequalities that they perpetuate. In early March, ex-Guardian environment editor John
మీ
Vidal.
క్లాస్ పేరేంటి నీకు మాత్రం పెట్టారు అవి ఏమో మరి మీ క్లాస్
I'm
సార్
audible, no? Some disturbance is coming. So,
Yeah, please mute your mics. This is Kilimunta Vijaya Venkata.
yeah.
Yeah, by
So
the way,
the nature responsible for COVID-19, and that writing says that a number of researchers today think that it is actually humanity's destruction of biodiversity that creates the conditions for new viruses and diseases to arise. And in fact, a new discipline, planetary health, is emerging that focuses on the increasingly visible connections between well-being of humans, other living things, and the entire ecosystem. So, could nature actually be taking revenge on us by unleashing new diseases? And in the last few decades, we have certainly been faced with a succession of uh, viruses that have jumped from other living organisms to the humans, bird flu, Ebola, and all others. And in the future also, there will be many more of these in store. But as commercial activity penetrates ever deeper into the world's wilderness, we will likely encounter more and more unexpected biological forces we may not be able to control. So, could nature be taking revenge? That question keeps come, but then actually the balance, the Sarvodaya, which is also the a balanced integral relationship of man with others, with nature and our surrounding, the healthy relationship. So here others have started posing and reflecting that despite the cure awaiting us, it's at its laboratory somewhere. Soon there will be solution to this problem too. But we should not waste this moment, which needs Gandhian moment of pausing, halting, and rethinking. Or maybe, if needed, we can change the paradigm, our comfort zones, to come out and to remain inconsistent and to change our opinions. So we have to go on doing that. So therefore, citing the Mahatma, he says that Gandhi had clearly foreseen the unsubstantiality of Western patterns of production and consumption, and uh, making and had warned India about the danger inherent in imitating this. So must we then simply waste this opportunity the planet has given us in statistics, data, and laboratory processes? Or must we invest equally in the way we rebuild the world together? Should not we think of a holistic healing process? That is what G.S. Jayadeva didn't want to trust, he thinks and he suggests. People sick with COVID 19 need physical care, nursing, and medical care. Gandhi, without fear, would personally nurse them. He would be concerned about hygiene, cleaning, and others. So his emphasis on healthy lifestyle, all this wisdom on Karuna, again reminds us that we are following even a line when Gandhi says, even in economics and technology everywhere, even for doctors, he said everything is within the jurisdiction of non-violence and Sarvodaya, good for the motto of ethics, which will be even for doctors, the economic and ethics. And then Aristotle highlighted that wealth is good for something else, for happiness, good life, security, other things, good air to breathe, good drinking water. So something which should be retained, pollution free or less pollution, even for next generation, even for unborn ones. So all these things now time to rethink. And his trusteeship model, again in Sarvodaya, trusteeship will be like how much of need and greed, that will be the non-exploitative socio-economic relations, etc. Of again it matters, like uh, he comes close to socialist ideals, but then like later we saw in Binoy Bhave's Bhutan and all these movements, it was again always a dialogue instead of force and instead of one side's opinion, one class's opinion to be imposed on the other. It was an open ended dialogue and voluntarily change of mindsets, and then if one voluntarily comes for accepting oneself as a trustee, then just exploiting everything for one's own selfish pretense. That was the Gandhian way. And he also included, he would have liked this when we include happiness index in our new economy model, against utilitarian and against all kinds of one-sided majoritarianism. So not only how much a person can consume, but also how much we should consume. That became, just because we can multiply, technology can multiply. He says even if China and India keeps imitating Western model of consumption with such a large population, and how much the art will retain resources for us. And therefore, the subordination of all political, social considerations to moral consideration. Therefore, Satya and Niskama Karma and Ahimsa, that should be the guideline for Sarvodaya model, the trusteeship model, the Swaraj model, and the Sarvodaya. Professor N. Radhakrishnan puts that certain points that today's time we have some current areas our youths need to address and our situation needs: poverty alleviation and efforts to ensure justice for all, the growing inflation and black money, the spreading of violence, atrocities against women and weaker section, land distribution to the landless, providing employment to the marginalized. So all these problems around us, and a deeply rooted, but it should be combating the all pervading corruption, cannot any longer be treated just a matter of making laws and creating institutions, but rather it is deeply rooted in the activities of the civil society itself, the threats of terror groups in India's sovereignty, which in turn hampers the development goals. All these are some of the current to be addressed in a Gandhian line. So Gandhi's spiritual successor Bino Bhave, when he addressed this continued Gandhian legacy, and with his Jai Jagat, victory of the whole world, and Vasudhaiva Kutumbaka were viewed, but always there is a distance from what Gandhi says, actually what Gandhi stands for. And we just we have a tendency to put him more as the unscientific, as a religious kind of, as an institution, or that Gandhi as if is no longer with that scientific, with no longer that what is needed currently to address these problems. And therefore, all such efforts are also looked down in a similar way, as if these are, so when Vinod Bhave's efforts to integrate social action nurtured in humanism and spirituality, and centuries old wisdom of the land, that well-being and happiness lies in striving to achieve Jai Jagat, victory of the whole world, and Vasudhaiva Kutumbaka. And these were viewed as crowded judgment, and his great work as trick initiatives. But had the revolutionary steps of Bino Bhave undertaken along with Jayaprakash Narayan to realize Gandhi's dream of India been continued, the Sarvodaya Samaj dream by Gandhi would have been a reality. Social justice and equality to all were the cornerstones of the new social order Gandhi strove for. The Sarvodaya Samaj would have also effectively prevented and eliminated seeds of corruption. It is commendable that today, at least, we are and all are showing initiative, including Narendra Modi-led BJP government is also focusing now on Swachh Bharat, Gandhi Sarvodaya, along with their party's ideology of Antyodaya and the Make in India program to the Mahatma's call for becoming self-dependent and promotion of Swadeshi products. There is also an emphasis on more attention to be paid on the villages in some level. However, one should take cautious steps that the benefits of Sarvada, Swaraj, etc. should really reach the left out and the marginal ones directly without any intervention of the middleman in the process. The Sarvodaya concept, which emphasizes the welfare of all, particularly the upliftment of the Daridra Narayana, the objectivity of the poor, his infinite faith in the purity of means and ends in order to achieve the goal, and the simplicity with which Gandhi lived, all indicated all are interconnected essentially. The micro with the macro, man with living beings, with art, rocks, environment, and all other in the surrounding. How poverty alleviation is also tied with one's effort at ensuring justice to all in order to keep justice and fairness in trials, not to be hijacked only by ones who have power, money, riches, and muscle. And so Gandhi has so many other dimensions that we can use Gandhi's paradigms again and again, or we can revisit. So Sarvodaya became a dharma of the inherent goodness of all, a life of satya and ahimsa, and not only the utilitarian purpose of greatest good of all, but each for all and all for each. The Sarvodaya movement has its target in the establishment of a whole network of self-supporting village communities. The family relationships, which are confined at present to the blood group, will be extended to cover the whole village where distinctions based on race, creed, caste, language, and so forth will completely be eliminated. Agriculture will be so planned that all the people will have enough to consume. Industry will be conducted on a cottage basis till all the people in the village are gainfully employed. The need of the village will be determined by the people of the village themselves through village councils, representatives of the whole village. So all the decentralization ideals to empower the really needy instead of anything imposition. Gandhi feared most anything imposition centrally in a very impersonal manner. That he feared, and he always wanted to keep open the door for dialogue. And so, in a sense, there is, of course, Buddhist, the small sangha type of, you see, egalitarian spirit in Gandhi. But Gandhi is also, even in Buddha to Jainism to Ahimsa concept, if you see how Gandhi went on remoduling, reordering his Ahimsa, ultimately it became more like not just Jainist non-Hingsa, but also became like anything monologue can be also a Hingsa. If you do not respond to my greeting, if you just, that also can be damaging my image, can also be Hingsa. So everywhere he has his innovative way to redefine. And therefore, the introduction of productive handicraft in school curriculum, that also the charkha and all, it just the part of the curriculum which became handicraft or craft and as school subject. The idea was but to make learning of a craft. It was the entire teaching program. This implied a radical restructuring of the sociology of school knowledge in India, where productive handicrafts has been associated with the lowest groups of hierarchy of the caste system. So again, through this imbibing manual work part also, craft also, but not just in a very idiotic, dull way, but as creatively a joy out of it. See, not just technique, not just you have to do, you have to just keep on repeating the same machine kind of job. Not that way. Craft itself will retain or restore the joy in manual labor, where we have Kabira kind of, you just also tailor and you go to the field and you celebrate the seasons and you sing bhajans in the evening. So all this together ultimately leading to a satisfied life despite not having much to store or just not very capitally rich, but then a quality life. So Gandhi wanted to change the paradigm outlook of this manual labor and others to be associated with low caste. And even with his sector as Ahimsa, two sides. he tried to reunite actually two sides of Astika and Nastika philosophy, which was with Setta and Ghana, and with also Ahimsa and ethics with Nastika, Buddhism, Jainism. So these two as two sides, essential sides of the same coin, was similar uh, attempt address from Gandhi. So education also, like here again comes similarity with Tagore in many points, which we'll see how later also with Polli and village and folk and Santiniketan and Sriniketan. Tagore somehow who first respectfully called him discovered the Mahatma in Gandhi. So despite apparent some differences here and there, Tagore as a poet with more focus on aesthetics or the beauty and the other taste, and Gandhi more with pragmatic practical concerns. But then ultimately, despite all these, they shared at fundamental level many things, and which and we are grateful that we had such combination of Gandhi, Tagore, and many others who followed. And they had this similar concern for not only for nature as poetically to be loved, but also uh, something like their children's education and curriculum, and where also you have all these combinations. So his firm faith in the love for mankind. To him, love is the essence of morality, and no morality is possible without love. Truth can be attained through love. Love takes him toward God, and it makes all that is pleasant. Hence, love should guide all lives. Social, political revolution started by Gandhiji was prompted by his inherent love of humanity. And therefore, he was anxious to establish a spiritual society based on the principle of nonviolence, truth, and justice. And what is this truth for Gandhi? This truth was truth lies concealed by golden vessel. Do thou, O sun, open the entrance of that cover Hiranmayana Garbhena Achaditam Shaktam. So this half veil, which later we find in Heidegger's philosophy of aletheia, truth to be dug, is it's buried and you have to go on digging it. And the depth of truth, not only the superficial structure and measurement, but also the depth that I can see the sorrow in your face. That also, if you can uh, include in our inclusive dialogue, that is something in that line. Gandhi comes close, of course, in because truth in what sense? Of course, the human dimension of truth. The truth is integral, which will also keep room for love, non-violence, and uh, include everyone. No one is less important. And so after Gandhi, Jürgen Habermas and the theorists of the Frankfurt School have also emphasized the power of debate, provided uh, violence and manipulation are kept out of purview. So in democracy or something that aggressive debate and that if you go for rational dialogue and then listening to the other, even aletheia or truth has no paying opportunity to the unveiled, half veiled, and therefore Gandhi always keeping the option to change his opinions, change his positions continuously, because truth will be revealed. This side of the truth, like the Jain, you see the elephant, you touch from one side and you say it is a big trunk, then you have four legs, all these partial sides of Anikantabhada of Jainism, etc. So here the dialogue can be still continued. And the Habermas and that when you have to, that reason we argue is because in principle we believe that consensus can be arrived at. For Habermas, democracy brackets away all considerations of power, wealth, so that debates can be dominated by reason alone. Given the close concordance of this position has with the Gandhian stand of political ahimsa, it is indeed surprising why Habermas never quoted Gandhi. Perhaps he too saw Gandhi as an exotic, otherworldly, political ascetic in many ways. because we often have a tendency to push Gandhi only in the line of religious people, as if non-violence is a cult, buried forever. Then occasionally you have to renew it ceremonially. And Gandhi is to be not to be ceremonially contacted, and that is why if we see the modernism, as we said, even with the spirit of modernism, the spirit of reason and rational, the scientific mind, these all Gandhi tried. And even in our constitution, we have many positive inputs because of such his arrogantly keeping to non-violent position over all other, and not giving the final say to that this is the truth, that against this the truth, Gandhi's position was continuous dialogue. So Gandhi debates can take place between people of different life forms once violence is kept out. Though Habermas doesn't come out very clearly on this, his method precludes the coexistence of two life forms if communicative rationality is to be advanced. So there can be different life forms, and all these different life forms can be dialogue means that the other, see, accommodating the other into this, and how best one can do it. And so in this, the communicative rationality also keeps room for uh, respecting the other as other. And Gandhi would be, uh, this is why there has to be a consensus around the untheorized and the taken for granted aspects of the life world. And as communicative rationality presumes a shared definition of the situation between interlocutors. Gandhi was more realistic and deeply practical. For him, life worlds need not merge, but debates can still take place provided violence is pickled outside the art. Now, this we see in many occasions on his interreligious dialogue to non-violence. So here you see that there can be many life worlds and shared together in a shared platform, rational platform, but it doesn't mean one life force is completely finally merges with the other. But even then, without that, Gandhi keeps room for consensus. And Gandhi would be a forgotten figure if all his arguments were based on validity claims, especially if one were to push hard the objectivity, right cause, that this is the truth, the shared, finally subtle, rational consensus, that one final truth doesn't come. And how can we prove the rightness of celibacy or of the spinning wheel? Why should women come out of their homes in the defense of satyagraha? Can capitalists and workers function like two wings of a bird? Though such questions hardly admit of any consensus, yet Gandhi enlarged our public sphere by encouraging an open debate on each of these issues. That he succeeded in this was because he never compromised on non-violence. So Gandhi's lasting significance lies perhaps not so much in what he actually did, but what he stood for. Men like him may be done to death, but their message is not silenced in the making of this century. Gandhi's liberal secularism was therefore not one of grand gestures, allegations to constitutional and legal norms. A secular society for Gandhi would be one where we could share one another's sorrows. Could John Rawls have done better when he asked us to participate in one another's fate? As Gandhi remarked, independent India, as conceived by me, will have all Indians belonging to different religions living in perfect friendship. They both took a civilizational view of the world and of India's place in it. This meant that they understood just how different India's history and culture were from that of the modern urbanized West. Of both thinkers like Tagore and Gandhi, they shared humanity was fundamentally spiritual, a notion largely alien to the desacralized modern world. To them, the absence of this realization is what see, something that the desacralized world has to keep room for. It cannot be completely buried. It cannot. The missing absence of that, the absence of this realization, is what uh, modernity inherently makes modernity inherently competitive and aggressive. So Gandhi's emphasis on the individual. Now here we see that the small scale village production rather than larger scale factory manufacture can bring about peace, freedom, and socio-economic development in a reasonable period. And both Tagore and Gandhi, they had the belief in, um, when Tagore talks about Pulli Samaj and the society as community, where you have the folk level or you have individual freedoms as community binding, and that is also in a sense of life whole that can also nurture or nourish that which will be the impersonal phase of homogeneous state. Homogeneous state can also be nurtured or strengthened by such kind of dialogue with community, where freedom or something like beyond reason, also there will be different life holds and all going for dialogue. So this will also be very much there in both uh, Tagore and Gandhi, despite differences. So we have to look back to Gandhi, and after the near failure of both communism and capitalism, we have to look for a third power which could provide a better and more positive human system for building a better world, a new system that would be free from any sort of violence at the individual as well as at the social level. Here comes the relevance of Gandhi, who advocated a new socio-political system based on human values of love and compassion. So here again, if we see how Gandhi's views kept changing because his scientific spirit of not being dogmatic on anything, and despite his fondness for natural therapy and easily available indigenous medicine systems, uh, even at one time after, I think, his respect for modern medicine also grew. So it was never one sided. You see, there was always dialogue with science, and then even at the village level also, both Tagore and Gandhi also, they didn't want to reduce it to village level, but oral or folk level or the creative individual to be at the root, who cannot be just silenced, that can nurture, that can. So that is how they identified the creativity with folk. And therefore, even in his, at the age of 50, when Gandhi suffered badly from piles and persuaded to try surgery, he placed himself in the hands of Dr. Dalal, who in January 1919 operated upon Gandhi in Bombay so successfully that Gandhi never suffered from that ailment again. He now urged friends with any hint of piles to go to consult Dr. Dalal at once in February. Gandhi was asked to open a medical college in Delhi, and where Gandhi says, lecture, my quarrel is not against scientific spirit. My complaint is against the direction that science or technology has taken. It has chiefly concerned itself with the exploration of laws and methods, conducting to the merely material advancement of its own. But I have nothing but praise for the zeal, industry, and sacrifice that have animated the modern scientist in pursuit after truth. And modern medicines reveal a characteristic openness of mind, a willingness to change his. So this shows his willingness to change his views when the facts changed. Therefore, he says, my last position, maybe I had more information, out of which maybe my earlier position needs to be changed. So here we saw his scientific position, and even when again, you say today's pandemic situation, if Gandhi would have said that you cannot, nothing should come, that will be mechanical, that will be machine like, if you do not take consent of the other against whom the harm is inflicted, even the disease or the virus, you see, we have to become magical. It doesn't ask, there is no reason, there is no rationality. Anytime you feel, you fear, I may be the positive next, you don't know. So people become magical when you do not know the scientific reason how to proceed, what to do, and when. So here again, Gandhi's, when he at times he says modern scientific or society became diseased, the consumer society, the diseased. Now, diseased was in a machine, in a faceless, dialogueless, like it is like machine spreading. A virus just coming and we have no reason why. Then it will be machine like. You do not take the consent of either me whether to be affected or not to be affected, and you go on. So we become victims. That he wanted to avoid, that science should not be have that. So he also wanted to ensure with his moral and religious dimension that it should not have the uh, reductionist epistemology, which reduces the higher to the lower, essence to the substance, form to matter, and through which modern science seeks to explain the former in terms of the latter. Gandhi here he says that he was against the privileged, privileged modernism's commitment to the epistemology of universal truths, objective knowledge, and master narrative, terming that a civilization and that will lead us to all disease state, the civilization that takes note neither of morality nor of religion. That was the problem. And also with Habermas, we can see Gandhi again post-secular religiosity kind of understanding. The Habermas was defending a space for religious traditions at a time when nation states have declined, but individual freedoms, basic rights of citizenship, and a certain religious homogenization has already been established in European societies. Constituting the core of the civilization is the craving for material comforts that influences the life of individuals in a way that makes them accumulate resources in an unlimited way. In his My Story with Experiments of Truth, modern science is criticized for denying transcendental dimension of reality and rejecting the transtemporal. So 2 points. One was the anti-reductionist point, and the other was the moral, the spiritual, the anti-transcendental position. And here we can see how um, even Habermas, in his own way, tried to explore a dialogue which communicative rationality also with the Gandhi using different categories. Gandhi is critical of the state of political that is supposed to be autonomous from or external to the rest of social life, and the standards that govern the former, I assumed, and diverse from the private moral standards. So he said that he feared that the impersonal phase homogeneously law-like, which will simply keep no room for individual level, which both Tagore and Gandhi saw the joy, the nurturing of life in the colonial, in the Polli, in the small localities where that was a free, a community kind of relationship. They wanted to go for dialogue. Gandhi wanted to go for dialogue at all level, like medicine, multiple medicine systems from scientific to Ayurvedic and homeopathic and home treatment. Also, what will be available? If a very expensive medicine is now prescribed and which is not affordable and which is also not available, what is the point? That is why he wanted to keep room for, instead of going only that as the solution, he wanted to keep room for alternate provisions, so that if that medicine is not affordable, it is not available for poor people, other people, at least they have something which already other systems can provide. So it is not going back to that, but it is in a dialogue with even with religion and all. Also, we have seen it was with a Vasudhaiva Kutumbaka type of dialogue and questioning, and also the moral, particularly the free individual spirit. So Sarvodaya, that way Gandhi wanted to connect. Thank you. I think we can discuss more on if some questions come.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Professor Barwa. It was very illuminating, connecting Habermas to a lot of Western philosophers and Gandhi's quest to actually legitimize his stand about the use of science and the understanding of technology and the benefits of the use and understanding of science and technology in society. I will open it up for a few questions because I think time is we have another speaker before we go in for the summing up. So, questions, please. Yeah. Um, yeah, Prabhu. Yes, I can. Professor Prabhu Venkatraman from the Department of Humanities. Yeah, Prabhu, you can please go ahead asking a question.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am, for a nice presentation. Interesting. I just have one small question. Particularly when you talk of no Habermas and this position of giving the scope for public discourse of the many issues, which is also cited that no Gandhi would also be interested in, or Gandhi would also no on the same line with respect to Habermas. That's fine, but we also know that no, ma'am, in many situations, at least Gandhi was in a sense trying to use this fasting as a tool sometimes, to at least a sort of discontinuation of the dialogue in the public sphere. Can you just give some more insights into that one? Like the Gandhi sometimes using the tool of satyagraha or the fast, to really, take care of some of the discussions which you really do not want to further entertain. Is it something like that? Can you just
Yeah,
throw more
yeah,
light on
yeah.
that one? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So here, what I wanted to say is Gandhi's position will be like not that objective consistency. You see, like he says, I want to change my position, and his understanding of consensus accordingly will be of it will be a dialogue in a holistic way instead of my position, and finally all will come to that in an agreement, rational agreement of two sides. But here there can be a deeper layer of over the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. There can be further exploration. As already he said, human dimension of truth, which you have to have seen, unseen, and maybe the scope for growing along with the life world horizons, variety of life worlds, and possibility of exploring all these in a larger holistic way. Maybe that way, when he put over all these dialogues the moral non-violent dimension, which is akin to spiritual or loving, like not rejection of the other, keeping room for listening to the other. Now listening to the other may not mean we all think alike, that homogeneity, and at the cost of that his consensus may keep room for, and what you say, the past and all. Sometimes when Gandhi thinks, suppose, I'm just presuming, if he thinks that, okay, non-violence should be the, or non-killing, or spiritual integral harmony should be the basic paradigm, then definitely he is not going to change that because of many consensus, many objectively correct positions other way, and he will try to, but because listening to them also, and he will try to change their, you see, that basic position. So here a little bit of manipulation, as you said, fasting, you see, asking you to see from a different light. to go for another kind of experience. And then maybe you change your position. So this reason cannot be only objectively only because of, see, the arguments and counter arguments you now going to prove or disprove, but the consensus level will be, if you want to restore religiosity or something, unless you have had that experience or something which is missing from the creative level, that experience, you give some scope for having that experience, recreate that situation. After that you may change, or you may see things differently, or you may come to a consensus. So instead of even conversion and all, you see, he was against conversion because all religions can stand as a dialogue, as me like, but not exactly me like. They say similar, or we may be fellow travelers, you can say. So fellow travelers pursuing the truth, and truth can be manifold. So these are some of his positions, and therefore he thinks he's going for consensus. Going
Thank
for
you.
consensus, but reviewing the, even for Hinduism or some of the religions, when he says that criticism should come from self-criticism, preparing even his own people, own tradition, ready for self-criticism. One is criticism, another is self-criticism, my own position also.
Thank
So
you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Baijo. Thank you, Professor Bro. Yeah, any more before we move on to our next speaker? Um, uh, yes, I think not. Yeah. Okay. I think we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Baijo. Be there with us.
yes,
Uh, for the we'll wind up soon. So I now invite Professor Pahi Saikia from the Department of Humanities and Social Science. He teaches political science, and she, besides many of her other research interests, it is there is ethnic identity politics, tribes, and indigenous people in Northeast India. And recently, she has published a book on India Myanmar borderlands, ethnicity, security, and connectivity, which actually for which I actually wanted, or rather, Pahi has looked into the the peace and conflict situation, that's or rather worked in the peace and conflict situation in Northeast India. So Dr. Pahi Sakya, I would like to invite you for delivering your talk. Uh, yeah, Pahi, are you there?
Hi, Sukanya. Thank
Yeah,
you so
yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. Please
Can you
begin
hear
your
me?
presentation. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh,
Okay. A very good afternoon to everyone. I am actually sharing my slides.
yeah, I
Are
can
you
see. We
able
can
to
see
view
your
that?
slides.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I'm trying to make a slideshow, but I don't know how that works here. Uh,
I think if you start
okay,
it in your own slide, it will just go. Open it in the hard disk and put out it on slideshow. It will show.
slideshow. Does it work that way?
Yeah, it will work.
Okay. But anyways, if it doesn't
Yeah.
work, I have sent it to you.
Okay.
And you can also, yes, do the same thing on my behalf. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today to speak in the seminar. I do not have much expertise to speak on Gandhi, and I'm just a beginner on Gandhian philosophy. So I still remember my political theory classes when I went through the literature and went back to read some of the fundamental works on Gandhian philosophy. So thank you for this opportunity once again. Today, I am going to share my thoughts on basically focusing on conflict and peace by using the Gandhian perspectives on Sarvodaya and overall Gandhi's ideas on state development, modernity, and social construction. The relevance of Gandhian philosophy and his contentious legacy, as scholars have put it, has been a matter of great debate, as we all know. And I think the former panelists today and yesterday, they have spoken at length about the philosophy of Sarvodaya and Gandhi's works. So I'm not going to repeat those writings, but I would like to focus on the relevance in terms of peace and conflict literature. So some would even argue that today, in a highly interconnected state system, it is even important to understand Gandhi's vision of state and modernity, especially at a time of COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on democratic spaces, urban commerce, and cultures. Also, when national governments have adopted various measures limiting public mobility and strategic choices. For instance, India's emphasis on self-reliance, decentralization, which Professor Alaka Sharma has also pointed out in today's lecture, while encouraging local capacity building and indigenization through legal reforms, is worth mentioning in this regard. So Gandhian philosophy, therefore, has to be located at the interface of micro-level, subnational, and transnational forces. With this very brief introduction, I would like to talk about the brief background on today's topic. A large part of the conflict studies, as you would know, is concentrated mostly on building peace and governance from highly coercive and militarized perspectives within regulatory states. However, there is evidence which partially supports these discourses and instead argues for rescaling of governance from non military perspectives. Here I am making an attempt to understand peace, governance, and transitional justice in Northeast India using Gandhian perspectives. The objective is to examine how peace building can be re articulated through negotiations, non military, and participatory approaches. I think these are some of the basic aspects of Gandhian philosophy, as Professor Archana Barua has also pointed out in her lecture, of governance and violence affected societies. And at the same time, it is very critical to document the trajectory and challenges to provide the ideological foundations of Gandhian philosophy in relation to inclusive participatory governance and peaceful reconstruction in such societies. I think something happened with the file. So the discussions that I'm going to do today are grounded mostly in the experiences of conflict and peace transitions in India's Northeast. I'm sorry, the slides, there's something happening with the slideshow. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Yeah, there's something happening with the slides. Can you see the PPTs? I'm not able to view them.
No,
Right.
we can't see them. No,
Okay.
yeah.
Again, I'll try to do it again. Okay. It's right here. Sorry about that. Okay. So I have spoken about the background. Now, what do we mean by reconstruction and peace building? Here I'm going to deal with some of the basic aspects and the approaches that we can understand using Gandhian philosophy. There is an extensive literature, as we know, on conflict reconstruction and peace building, which can be applied to understand conflict in the global south. These studies focus on various aspects of peace building, like restoration of livelihoods, establishing rule of law, developing capacities, individual as well as institutional capacities, control of arms, building democratic institutions, inclusive governance, and building confidence between groups in conflict or the parties in conflict. So, peace building therefore remains a formidable task. Effective peace building measures requires significant behavioral changes. And as Aloka Sharma pointed out, it's more, if you look at Gandhian philosophy, you need to understand more in terms of the external as well as the internal dynamics. So therefore, effective peace building measures requires significant behavioral changes, building confidence, cross-cultural communication, guaranteeing intergroup security, building networks, tolerance, and trust between the fighting communities. To draw some of the important works, as Michael Ross's work shows, the the practice of building cross-community cooperation has been established through local councils in some parts of Europe with the aim of bridging differences between religious groups and communities. Other approaches focus on resolving deep-seated structural problems that give rise to ethnic conflicts in deeply divided societies. So, constructive peace building therefore requires the involvement of civil society, middle range actors, and grassroots leaders who can bring about significant social changes, empowerment, awareness, not only in terms of inter-community relationships, but also in terms of transforming the socio-economic map and the structural conditions of the groups involved in the conflict. So, some of the approaches therefore identify comprehensive, deep seated structural problems for building constructive peace and improving the structural conditions of the groups in the conflict. These approaches focus on non coercive and non violent methods, similar to the approaches on conflict by Gandhi. As Weber writes, in Gandhian terms, mere dispute settlement, and I quote, mere dispute settlement does little to answer the fundamental questions, taking personal responsibility for negotiation rather than assigning the process to arbitrators or adjudicators, offers an increased opportunity for personal growth by exposing parties to the views of the other and provides the opportunity for deep self reflection. And in Young India, Gandhi writes that the satyagrahi's object is to convert, not to coerce, the wrongdoer. Satyagraha as the Gandhian approach to conflict resolution, as Weber also writes, means that the Satyagraha is Gandhi's technique of nonviolent activism. The term has variously been translated as passive resistance, nonviolent direct action, and even militant nonviolence. For Gandhi, it was not only a method of conducting conflict, it was also a way of life, of living in truth. In Hail Swaraj, which is a small, it's a very small book that tells us a lot about most of his philosophies, and considered to be one of his, philosophies which tells us more about the negative aspects of Sarvodaya. Gandhi writes that the passive resistance is an all sided sword. It can be used anyhow. It blesses him who uses it and him against whom it is used. Without drawing a drop of blood, it produces far reaching results. It never rusts and cannot be stolen. Competition between passive resistors does not exhaust. The sword of passive resistance does not require a scabbard. It is strange indeed that you would consider such a weapon to be a weapon merely of the weak. And then he goes on to say that passive resistance has been described in the course of our discussion as truth force. Truth, therefore, has necessarily to be followed, and that at any cost. In this connection, academic questions occur to only those who wish to justify lying. Those who want to follow truth every time are not placed in such a quandary, and if they are still saved from a small position. Passive resistance cannot proceed a step without fearlessness. Those alone can follow the path of passive resistance who are free from fear, whether as to their possessions, false honor, their relatives, the government, bodily injuries, or death. Uh, Similarly, Gandhian views have been applied by scholars working on conflict and peace. For instance, Galtung, who has worked and studied Gandhi for a very long time and applied his philosophy to understand peacemaking in different societies. He summarizes Gandhi's conflict norms that conflicts should be resolved. Parties should seek negotiation, positive social transformation, and transformation of both the self and the opponent. Therefore, Sarvodaya as a guiding principle towards conflict resolution has a lot to say about it as a movement as well as an idea. It calls for reconstruction of the state and society on the basis of fundamental principles of truth, nonviolence, tolerance, distribution, or interdependent. The ideal will be characterized by an inclusive social order against self interest. The ideal society calls for the devolution of political power and the decentralization of the processes of production and consumption. The village will be the basic unit, the pivot of the structure. Sarvodaya meaning universal upliftment or progress of all, as Professor Sukanya Sharma also pointed out at the very beginning of yesterday's lecture, where every member will be free from any greed for limitless acquisition of material wealth. Everyone will thus get ample opportunity to produce and earn sufficiently through honest work for decent and dignified living. In a Sarvodaya society, there will be no centralized authority, where politics will be the instrument of power, but an agency of service. And these have been debated by scholars on and on at various levels. And all people will be imbued with the spirit of love, fraternity, truth, nonviolence, and self sacrifices. There will be a no party system, and society will be free from the tyranny of the majority. So then, using Gandhian approach, I'm here trying to draw the parallels between conflict resolution methods and Gandhian philosophy on the other hand. Gandhian philosophy opposes ethnic and religious violence and speaks more in terms of negotiation, arbitration, and judicial adjudication, where the idea is a conversion, the means through satyagraha, and trust building among the conflicting parties. It also allows spiritual and moral development at both an individual as an institutional level. Modern conflict resolution methods draw a lot from these approaches, and the focus is more on the mediation and third party involvement of conflict resolution, where there should be mutual agreement between the two conflicting parties, avoiding as much as possible legal adjudication and trying more of accommodation between the conflicting parties and the minority views. CBMs, which means the confidence building measures of the conflicting parties at an individual as well as at a societal level, should be the focus of conflict resolution method. Transformative justice or transformative resolution, which also means the structural changes or dealing with the root causes of the problem of conflict or the questions or the reasons that actually cause a conflict, should be the focus of conflict resolution methods. So then it's important to draw out some of the important elements of the Gandhian philosophy, which is decentralization and participatory governance as a method of conflict transformation. This particular element of conflict transformation talks about deepening of democracy and power devolution, which means that there has to be an improvement in the quality of life by deepening of democracy. Implementation of policies based on local needs in terms of self government and participation. And there has to be intergovernmental checks and balances where free market perspectives and regulatory and predatory state nature is questioned, and there is a need to reconstruct such states and rebuild those kinds of institutions. Decentralization allows provincial leaders access to resources, and that is also one way of dealing with conflict transformation using methods or means of nonviolence and passive resistance. Targeted programs and service delivery is one of the important ways of dealing with participatory governance and conflict transformation, uh, which is also one of the important areas of discussion and debate as far as Gandhian philosophy to conflict is concerned. Transparency and accountability, responsiveness towards aggrieved communities at the subnational level, which is allowed, which is provided by decentralization and participatory governance, is also an important and integral part of the conflict transformation process. And this also allows local capacities and building of local capacities and decision making at a very, very local level, at a grassroots level. Uh, Conflict resolution by using participatory governance and decentralization allows the resolution of conflicts and reduces the risk of separatism. So therefore, it creates the conducive conditions for parliamentary democracy, which is something that Gandhi also promoted when he was writing in some of his earlier writings. He was trying to uh, focus on parliamentary democracy, establishing parliamentary democracy in the context of India, federalism, subnational units, allowing more power to the subnational units, uh, lessening party competition, getting rid of party competition, allowing heterogeneity, accommodation of minority groups, access to civic organizations, so on and so forth. Now, when we apply these approaches to the real world situations of conflict transformation, there are problems and there are challenges as well. Therefore, peace, governance, and transitional justice have been debated on and on in order to use the Gandhian philosophies and the elements of decentralization. Scholars have argued that there are challenges, and in practice, if you see how these methods are being applied as far as conflict transformation is concerned in the global south, it might lead to problems of destabilization within the subunits. It might lead to the risk or in the rich provinces which are rich in terms of resources, while allowing more decentralization and creating more destabilization. There might be challenges of emerging new democracies in a more negative sense. There might be incentive to overspend and reap personal benefits. There might be complex output functions among the fighting groups, and it might lead to the development, rising of local oligarchs if decentralization and participatory governance is not distributed in a proper manner. Oppressed may look towards central protection. Therefore, on the surface, we see that decentralization reforms seemed alluring than and they engendered institutional pluralism and political participation of rural communities in different parts, especially in the Indian context. Nonetheless, despite the normative and conceptual appeal, these local power structures have immensely failed to provide social democratic citizenship. These institutions have instead muddled through problems of political legitimacy, which is also an important element of the Gandhian philosophy since their inception. These institutions show rampant unaccountability and dominance of the local elites, and they serve as vehicles to develop strong patron client relationships between the local elites and political parties. So, the effectiveness of these kinds of institutions is highly constricted because the elites who are in control of these institutions compete for respective shares of public resources rather than seriously tending to pressing developmental needs. Some unique characteristics come into play when we analyze the performance of local autonomous governments in most of these societies, where they lack interethnic engagement, lack of capable and committed leadership, and empowerment of local political leaders who prioritizes power consolidation than enhancing participatory democracy. So, therefore, uh, what could be some of the alternatives? Some of the alternatives are newer modes or approaches to understand conflict transformation using decentralization and participatory governance as a way, and also negotiation as a way of addressing the Gandhian philosophy would be to promote community supporting approaches, where community driven development would be more considered to be more sustainable, and governance around local territorial units would provide uh, local structures stability. There has to be a synergy between community and governing structures, which is also another way of looking at the state and society relationships, regulating the state limiting the role and the functions of the state and giving more powers to the societal um, forces. Conditions would be institutional framework, the resource transfers, local knowledge and capacity building, individual choices, building up social capital, norms, and social practices. Another important element, an alternative approach would be to look at empowering or giving more and more choices to different gender in terms of gender. So, enhancing participation of women and transgender in governance is therefore one of the key elements of such state development and goals of modern states. So, with this objective, gender sensitive governance reforms have been undertaken in developing countries to increase the number of women in public policy making. And governance process and peace building institutions in conflict affected societies, therefore, has to be looked at in a more inclusive and a more socially inclusive way. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Since I had 10 minutes, I was trying to be as fast and brief as I could. I sort of ran through some of my slides and points. I'll be very happy to take questions on conflict transformation from our participants. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Saikya, so much, because the relevance of Sarvodaya as far as, or the application of it in conflict resolution was something which was not touched upon specifically by any of the speakers. So it was important that we include this as part of a discussion, and the relevance of Gandhi or Gandhian philosophy in today's India, or rather in the world, or the type of revivalism or revival of Gandhian philosophy that we are trying to think about now matters when we actually talk about this type of application. So thank you so much. Yeah, I will open uh, I'll open it for discussion. Yeah, any questions? It's an yeah. Yes. I think if there are none, I would take the liberty to ask a very simple one-liner from your experience of working among ethnic communities in Northeast India. Uh, or rather, we had Niketu Iralu yesterday, where we all know the type of um, uh, efforts that he has made and in conflict resolution, and he has also succeeded. But this type of the way you have put it in the slides, or rather, if we call it uh, uh, Sarvodaya and attempt it, like how Panchayati Raj was brought in, do you think it will be more powerful using the term to sort of, build this type of conflict resolution measures in Northeast India?
Thank you, Professor Sharma, for the question. I would look at it in different ways, and I'll try to address this question. I'll try and address your question by using experiences of conflict in the Northeast. And also, as Professor Iralu pointed out yesterday, he's an activist, so he's very grounded in terms of his experiences of conflict resolution. Now, if you look at some of the methods used, for instance, when Panchayati Raj was instituted by some of the constitutional provisions in India, the idea was community development. The idea was more of inclusive governance. As far as conflict affected areas are concerned, you will see that Panchayati Raj institutions are applied in selected areas in the Northeast. Whereas in others, particularly in the hills, you will see that there are other ways of resolving conflict using different other methods. For instance, Article 371, and maintaining community driven approaches, or maintaining age-old customary laws to allow groups in conflict, to allow them to resolve their own and manage their own resources using local needs and capacities. So if you're looking at Panchayati Raj, the way it has been applied and the way it has been applied and implemented in the context of particularly states like Assam, Manipur, and some of the plain areas within the Northeast, um, it has not been used as a conflict resolution method, but we can look at as a way of conflict transformation. Because if you look at in the context of Assam, it was mostly in the 2000s, late 1990s and 2000s, when we were moving towards a process of negotiation with the rebel groups in the context of Assam. You will see that Panchayati Raj elections for the first time were held freely and more or less fairly, I would say, in some of these districts in Assam. So, micro level studies tell us that the question of transparency and accountability is still a distant dream, but direct, democracy, which is elections, or establishing electoral institutions to direct democracy, which is one of the first signs of conflict transformation, uh, was experienced in the context of conflict affected areas in Assam in the 2000s. And it was because of a kind of negotiation that the central states had with some of these conflicted groups. So I would look at it more in terms of conflict transformation as a process which is still in a process of transition. So there is still a long way to go. As far as other states like Nagaland and other states are concerned, I think you would also know about the debate which is going on about including or inclusive governance as far as women are concerned in the Nagaland municipal councils. So the problems or challenges lie in terms of applying the traditional means of conflict resolution and transformation, which is Article 371, and the inclusion of marginalized groups, especially women, using the Panchayati Raj or Article 3, 91, the 91 and 93 and 94th Amendment, which was done in the Indian Constitution. So I think these are different ways of looking at how conflict transformation can happen using negotiation as a means of conflict transformation, which was one of the important Gandhian ways of looking at state building as well as the process of building and integrating some of these regions into the rest of India. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Sakya. Okay, yeah, any more? So we are in the end of this deliberations we had for 2 days, trying to remember Gandhi. It is his 150th birth anniversary since 150 years Gandhi was born, and that is the objective behind, or rather, it is celebrating 150 years of Gandhi, of the birth of the Mahatma. So thank you so much, Dr. Pahi Sakya, for bringing in this insights and looking at it from a perspective which can be used for safer, or for the benefits of societies which are struggling with conflicts and conflict-ridden societies. Thank you so much. So yes, we will now move on to the next, a very brief summing up of the deliberations that we have had, and uh, we will now request Dr. Kiran Keshavamurthy from the Department of Humanities and Social Science to please kindly uh, uh, Kiran also looks at Gandhi, works on it to offer his observations and also sum up the deliberations that we had for the last 2 days. So, yeah, Dr. Keshavamurthy, you are there. Yeah. Pahi, your slides, can you take them? Oh, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Pahi.
Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Sharma, and I wish to congratulate all the speakers and my own colleagues for presenting their very invaluable thoughts and suggestions on Gandhian philosophy and its applicability to the modern world. I will just, I mean, I have one of the most challenging tasks, frankly, because I haven't really had time to, read everyone's papers and so I give my comments best when I actually read someone's paper. And so, since I didn't have access to everyone's paper, it is a little challenging. So I would like to ask you to bear with me, just in case I do not do justice. But I will just probably just look, just probably go over some of the points that were made on the first and the second day. So the first talk was delivered by Christian Bartloff, who is the president of the Gandhi Information Center, and Dominic Mething, who is in the Department of Civic Education and the History of Political Thought at the Freie University at Berlin. Their talk delineated the importance of Sarvodaya as a political message of universal equality and well-being. The term Sarvodaya acquires a prophetic significance in the context of the East, where the rising sun symbolizes universal emancipation and progress. Sarvodaya is the basis for Swadeshi, which symbolizes spiritual self-reliance as the highest form of self-reliance in the face of racial oppression and enslavement. The speakers observed that Swadeshi, which was also the name of a movement that protested against the partition of Bengal, was for Gandhi the soul of Swaraj or self rule. Further, they note that the founding of Gandhi's first settlement project, Phoenix at Inanda, near Durban in South Africa, and his printing press that published the Indian Newspaper was last, and the Olange Institute of John and Nokutela Dube in the tradition of Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute. Gandhi admired Washington's life as a slave who, following the proclamation of freedom to all slaves, acquired a university education and rose to political prominence. He devoted his life to the social and economic empowerment of African Americans. But for Gandhi, it was Washington's emphasis on practical farming and vocational education in various trades that was essential for the social and economic self-reliance of the oppressed and colonized peoples. Similarly, John Dube's Olange Institute was another model for Gandhi's settlement that imparted vocational skills in journalism, gardening, shoe, and dressmaking. Gandhi also drew inspiration from Tolstoy's writings, which envisioned an equal and just heaven on earth that was premised on different forms of bodily labor, which produced food and all those things that are essential for human survival. The ideal ashram for Gandhi would be constituted by these forms of embodied labor and a willingness to serve others. From Gandhi's praise of the ascetic and laboring figures of Jesus Christ and Tolstoy, it is clear that that he privileges bodily labor at the cost of the mind. It was perhaps a necessary strategy determined by the political exigencies of the period, but the question of intellectual and aesthetic labor and different forms of expression that are also important for human survival remains unaddressed. So, as Ambedkar observed in the context of the toiling, depressed classes, as he called the Dalits, intellectual labor was contingent on leisure, which is something that the untouchables had been denied. And he calls them untouchables, not me. So those who labored most of their lives were denied what was a privilege to cultivate and exercise their minds, which was, if anything at all, essential for their emancipation. Swarajya for Gandhi also rested in moral restraint and a refusal to blindly imitate the material advancements and accomplishments of the West, which he feared would ruin the possibility for simple life dedicated to collective welfare. Then the second speaker was Mr. Niketu Iralu, who drew from Gandhi's ideal of Sarvodaya to understand his rich experiences of intertribal conflict and environmental degradation in Nagaland. He shared anecdotes from his own life to demonstrate the importance of Gandhian satyagraha and non-violent resistance in terms of negotiating with ethnic and cultural differences among tribes, between tribes in the state, as well as sexual hierarchies that exist within the domain of the household. Then for today's session, I kind of have just a few questions that I'd like to raise because the three papers are related and they overlap in certain very important ways. So, for example, Professor Sharma, her paper focused on the internal and external dynamics of Gandhian Satyagraha in terms of the individual's choice to live a simple but noble life, and in terms of the individual's relationship with society at large, which invariably involves violence, greed, and corruption. And so the importance of collective welfare cannot be underestimated here. The individual's growth is inherent in the growth of society. There has to be, of course, however, and this is a question that I raise because I know that all the three speakers have tried to answer this question in their own ways, but I still feel like this question requires, or a certain set of questions require a greater deal of deliberation. And I kind of noticed this also, and I'm also kind of grateful to Professor Archana Barua, and also as well as Professor Pai Sekia for giving us their own historical as well as political perspectives on how Gandhi's philosophy and Gandhian ideas can be used to understand the relationship between the local and the regional and the national, local governmental bodies, as well as central government, in terms of laws and practices, in terms of institutions, also in terms of, in the case of Professor Borua's presentation, in terms of also larger philosophical debates between Gandhi and Habermas, which were actually very important. And I think also, as Professor Borua had said initially in her paper, it's important to then think of Gandhi in very historical, evolutionary terms, and not think of Gandhi as a static thinker, but also think of in terms of how Gandhi's ideas and for example, about caste changed towards the end of his life. So I think we need to try and kind of historicize Gandhi whenever we actually try and speak about Gandhi, and not present Gandhi as a static thinker, or as someone whose ideas exist in a vacuum. So I'm glad that these speakers have refrained from doing that, and I appreciate their interventions. But still, I have a set of questions which I think need to be answered, because Gandhi may not have a definitive answer to all these questions himself. I feel like like I think Professor Borua was saying that Gandhi's thought constantly underwent changes and transformations. A lot of his answers were provisional. They were contingent upon certain social and political circumstances, like a lot of other activists and thinkers of his time were. And so it's not always possible to find a definitive answer. And so it's important, for example, in the debates that Gandhi has with Ambedkar, for instance, that Ambedkar also talks about questions, for example, Gandhi's idea of trusteeship. Who's going to be a trustee for whom, especially in the feudal system, in the zamindari system, who's going to be a trustee for whom and why? And do we take, for example, should the poor peasant or the landless Dalit take the zamindar as a trustee of his wealth, of his well-being? Doesn't he or she have the right to question or challenge the trusteeship? Who is the person who will take on the responsibility of moral self-redemption? Can anyone do it? In a certain phase of Gandhi's thought, it's very clear that person is the upper caste male. So that needs to be interrogated and challenged, and we need to then look for other answers from Gandhi himself, especially in the later Gandhi. If he in some ways actually challenges that opinion, then we also need to try and historicize Gandhi's own thought with all its transformations and contradictions, apparent contradictions perhaps, but historical nonetheless. That then it's very important to then think of, for example, how does he answer questions like, for example, would you think of Gandhi as an institution builder? Right? Was he someone who actually built institutions for the future nation to be? What would take the place of the colonial institutions? Is the answer just the self-sufficient village republic? Is that possible in the face of globalization and technology? And again, to go back to what Professor Saikia said, that there are lots of challenges to this. And I think Professor Saikia actually brought out a very important kind of a distinction between, the Gandhian approach as well as the modern CR methods. Where one of the important distinctions that I noticed, of course, was the fact that modern CR methods are addressing structural changes, and that's not easy to answer. I mean, because larger, deeper structural forces always involve a lot of competing and conflicting political and social interests across tribes, across castes, across economic groups, and so it's not easy to just have a dialogue. A dialogue is important, of course, but it's not a sufficient condition. What comes out of those dialogues is also what's important, and it's also important then to think about about authority as an idea and also as a formation. Are all forms of authority evil? Are all forms of central authority or centralized authority, are they all always necessarily evil? Notwithstanding the fact that authority needs to be decentralized, it needs to be all that federalized, but nonetheless, are all forms of authority, do they have to be questioned? I know that again, Ambedkar talks about this, that there needs to be a democratic, rational processes of conversation, of dialogue with authority, with different forms of governance, whether that's a nation state or something else. But still, it's important to in as much as it's important to try and delineate Gandhi's ideals, it's also important to look at what are the conditions of possibility, right? And these conditions of possibility are historically contingent. They're all constantly changing and evolving. So instead of applying, I mean, for me personally, I don't think you can actually apply Gandhi to anything. You can read Gandhi to try and sensitize, perhaps, your ideas of modern governance and modern society. And so you can't. There's no question of wholesale application because it's a different historical period. And also, I don't think that Gandhi was always thinking about, concrete images, concrete visions of institutions and all the contradictions and all the social and political challenges that come with institution building and with authority, right? And so one needs to then try and think in a more concrete fashion, use Gandhi nonetheless, and kind of have a dialogue with Gandhi, but nonetheless be critical, instead of just and I think very often Gandhi has answers to his own questions, especially if you read Gandhi across a long period of time. Then I think it's important to bring out those slippages, those frictions, in his ideas. So I think it's just important to kind of raise these questions because, for example, why this whole question about conversion? What about voluntary forms of conversion? Are all forms of conversion bad? And why were, for example, certain individual forms of freedom denied while others were allowed? Okay, what does it mean to what is a negotiation really between the self and the other, between the individual and community, right? Because there is a negotiation. You cannot just say that the good or the good or welfare lies primarily in the individual and then in society. It can't be this kind of sequential process. It has to be a simultaneous process, and that requires a lot of negotiation. And for example, this question of love. How does love negotiate with difference and violence? Are all forms of violence bad? I mean, I'm asking slightly controversial questions, but we need to actually think about this. That are all forms of violence, and can we completely avoid violence? That's a very moot question, especially when we try and there are different forms of violence, there are different degrees of violence. I'm not talking about killing and murdering, but even at the level of argument, at the level of discussion, at the level of trying to impose a consensus which may not be the consensus of everyone, but of the majority, and that might even be a just consensus for the time being. So how do we implement it, right? Without a certain degree of suppression, right? So these are questions that we need to. I mean, there aren't any definitive answers to this question, but these are questions that I'd like to kind of raise, right? So I will end with this. So thank you very much.
Ah, yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Kiran Keshavamurthy. We really end in a, like, oh, it's opening up, and that is what is important for any type of research and discussions, that you will always have future, doors which open up, and that is what I think Kiran has done. And yes, these questions are which we can further think about, and when we talk and deliberate on Gandhi. Now I think this is like we are ending, and it is important to sort of uh, say thank you to people who have made this possible. It was Professor T.J. Sitaram, director at Guwahati, whom we are grateful to for making this happen, because it was his initiative under which we organized this to discuss it, to deliberate on Gandhi, to think about Gandhi, and we saw the type of deliberations we had and the benefits that we have enjoyed with this. Uh, uh, all the speakers giving us very uh, 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 informative, lucid, articulate presentations, beginning from the first to the last one. So it has been a very benefiting experience for me. I have sat through all the lectures, and from the beginning till the end. And after listening to Kiran now, it is like um, so many facets of Gandhi, the Mahatma, that we are uh, deliberating, celebrating 150 years of Mahatma's birth. So I think there lies Sorry, there was a phone. So there is a very I'm sorry, I kept the video on. So there, I think I'm very grateful to Professor Sitaram for making this possible. Then we had the speakers. I'm so grateful that they accepted our invitation. Um, and I see Pahi here of all the rest whom I contacted, and so great accepted my uh, um request. Thank you so much, Pahi. You are there, and so I can personally tell you that we are so grateful to you and I'm so grateful to you for accepting my request and giving this presentation. Um, yeah, Pahi, are you there? Hello.
Thank, thank you for the
You
opportunity.
can
I
hear.
learned a lot in the process.
You
I
can.
really learned a lot. Thank you.
Okay. No, because you are like there, and it was really important that the other speakers are not there with us just now, but we are grateful to them. Then, of course, this online thing which we had to organize, and with the institutional facility that we have, very grateful to Dr. Debopriya Basu for continuously helping us in organizing this. HSS office staff. Mala Parag Jyotisaikia, Mala Basmotari, Rubul Gogoi, Durga Sharma, who has been with us continuously, with me continuously in and helping me to organize this. Without the five of them, I think this would have not been possible for me. And last but not the least, Kiran, who sort of made it, so much, livelier again. So we don't end. There is sort of another beginning. Thank you so much, Kiran. I think you are also there. So we live away with the we end with this takeaways, where we understood from the beginning the fact about that how it is not just about moral upliftment of the human soul, but it is how the surroundings, the environment matters to us so much that we create a surrounding where we actually can go for that type of high level of moral thought, morality. And then, of course, coming to questions like where we are looking at implementation of Gandhi's ideas, and how for nation state, as Pahi's deliberation, as Kiran's points have now brought forward, that um, uh, uh, it might that we need to sort of sort of look at certain aspects which may not altogether answers all the needs and requirements. So at what level we need to, and at which level we can sort of implement it, I think also needs further deliberations and deeper thoughts. So we end here, and thank you so much for being there, and wish hope in future we meet again in similar type of discussions. And we end with a prayer to Gandhi, and to the larger cause of humanity, that yes, there will be peace, hope, and peace, love, and cooperation, sharing of thoughts to grow, to develop as and make the world a safe place to live in. Thank you. Okay, we hang up now. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Sukanya, once again.
Thanks, Sukanya.